Every story about money, every rumor, every empire, every collapse seems to trace back to one name, a name whispered in royal courts, printed in secret reports, and echoed through centuries of power and paranoia: Rothschild. They began in a Frankfurt ghetto, 5 brothers, 1 vision, and rose to finance kings, rebuild nations, and shape the rules of modern banking itself. Their letters moved faster than armies, their gold decided the fate of wars, and their silence gave birth to one of history's most enduring legends. But who were they, really? How did a single family go from selling coins on a dusty street to rewriting the world as financial order? And why, 200 years later, does their name still spark both awe and suspicion? This is not myth. This is the story of ambition, secrecy, survival, and the creation of the system we all live in today. If you're ready to see how power truly moves, beyond politics, beyond propaganda, into the hidden history of money itself, then subscribe to The Seventh Economy, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the Rothschild dynasty, the family that built the modern world. In the cramped alleys of Frankfurt's Judengasse, where walls sweated with soot and hope was rationed like bread, a young man bent over a flickering candle. His name was Mayer Amschel Rothschild, one of thousands barred from owning land, from serving in government, from freedom itself. But he had something the world underestimated: patience, precision, and a fascination with money's hidden language. While others bartered for survival, Mayer studied the past: ancient coins, old empires, lost currencies, relics that told him one thing: power never truly dies. It only changes hands. So he began trading them. What started as a hobby in the shadows of poverty became his first key, a bridge into the world of princes. When the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, one of Germany's richest nobles, noticed the young dealer's honesty and knowledge, an unlikely alliance was born. In a Europe ruled by lineage, Rothschild offered something rarer than blood: trust. He handled the prince's finances discreetly, safely, profitably. While others flaunted gold, Mayer managed it like a secret weapon. Inside his modest home, the family gathered each night. His sons didn't grow up hearing stories of kings and heroes. They heard lessons about ledgers, secrecy, and discipline. He told them, "Our name is our fortune. Lose that, and all the gold in Europe means nothing." They listened. And when Mayer taught them the art of correspondence, writing in code, sending private messengers across borders, he wasn't just training bankers. He was building a network, one that would outlast monarchies and revolutions alike. Each move was calculated. In a world that locked Jews behind gates, Rothschild turned those gates into walls of strategy. He understood that if power feared him, it could also need him. And once it needed him, it would never shut him out again. By the time he died in 1812, his home in the ghetto had become the nerve center of Europe's most trusted financial house. His 5 sons, trained like soldiers in arithmetic, loyalty, and silence, were ready to spread his empire across the continent. The motto he left behind was simple: Concordia, Integritas, Industria, harmony, integrity, industry. But beneath it was something unspoken, a lesson learned in darkness, that the most powerful empires are born from privilege, they're built from exclusion. From the narrow streets of Frankfurt rose a dynasty that would one day finance wars, shape nations, and rewrite the meaning of wealth itself, not by sword or crown, but by trust. Across a continent torn by war and revolution, 5 brothers moved in silence: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt, each a city of ambition and danger, and each guarded by one name: Rothschild. After Mayer Amschel's death, his sons didn't scatter. They expanded. Where others built castles, they built connections. 5 men, 5 strongholds, linked not by bloodlines of kings, but by letters, codes, and trust. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt, the anchor, the keeper of records, the mind that watched over the family's empire like a watchtower. Salomon moved east to Vienna, into the heart of the Habsburg Empire, where decisions about Europe's fate were inked in secret. Karl went south to Naples, the gateway to the Mediterranean, rich in trade and royal intrigue. James, the youngest, built his power in Paris, charming, brilliant, and ruthless in finance. And Nathan, bold and impatient, planted his flag in London, the empire's financial heart. Nathan's London house on New Court looked ordinary from the street. But behind those doors ran one of the most advanced intelligence systems in Europe. Private couriers raced across borders carrying sealed letters and coded ink, faster than governments, faster than armies. Before the telegraph existed, the Rothschilds invented their own version of it. Every message mattered: bond prices, troop movements, political whispers. While generals fought with swords, the brothers fought with information. When the Napoleonic Wars reached their climax, Nathan saw opportunity where others saw chaos. He moved money through Amsterdam, London, and Paris, financing Britain's war effort while keeping lines open with France. He didn't pick sides, he picked profits. To kings, he was indispensable. To rivals, invisible. Their symbol, the 5 arrows, said it all. Individually fragile, together unbreakable. It appeared on their letters, their seals, their art. It wasn't just a family emblem, it was a strategy. Each branch could act alone, but their strength came from unity, a network no single war could destroy. Governments began to rely on them not just for money, but for speed, accuracy, and silence. The Rothschilds became the bloodstream of Europe's economy, pulsing gold and intelligence between capitals faster than any state could. And as empires rose and fell, they remained constant. 5 brothers bound by code, secrecy, and a father's vision. They didn't conquer Europe with armies. They conquered it with communication. Because in an age when power belonged to those who acted first, the Rothschilds were always the first to know, and the last to be caught off guard. The air over Europe was thick with gunpowder and debt. Cannons thundered across the fields of Waterloo. Armies marched, kings trembled, and behind the chaos, gold moved quietly through the hands of one family. While Napoleon fought with men, Britain fought with money. And that money flowed through Nathan Mayer Rothschild in London. In the early 1800s, Britain needed to fund its war machine, weapons, ships, soldiers. But the government's coffers were drained, its credit stretched thin. Nathan stepped in, not as a patriot, but as a strategist. He organized a vast financial operation, channeling funds across Europe through a network of couriers, brokers, and coded letters. He smuggled British gold to Wellington's troops, financing the fight that would end Napoleon's empire. And when the war was over, it wasn't generals who stood victorious in the new Europe. It was the Rothschilds. At the Congress of Vienna in 1815, kings and diplomats redrew the map of Europe. But the real power wasn't a tea at the table. It was in the hands of those who controlled the credit behind it. The Rothschild family became the architects of post-war finance, stabilizing currencies, funding reconstruction, and providing loans to the very monarchies that once waged war against each other. In France, James de Rothschild rose swiftly, rebuilding relationships and financing the Bourbon monarchy's return. In Austria, Salomon became the trusted banker of Prince Metternich, guiding the empire's finances through the turmoil of change. And in Britain, Nathan's influence deepened. He became the government's shadow treasurer, managing bonds, funding projects, and shaping financial policy from behind closed doors. The wars had made them indispensable, but peace made them powerful. They turned their gaze from battlefields to industry, investing in the lifeblood of the new age: railroads, mining, canals, and communication. From the Austrian Southern Railway to French coal mines, Rothschild capital fueled the infrastructure of the modern world. They didn't just lend money, they built systems, the veins through which Europe's commerce would flow for a century. Their greatest weapon wasn't wealth, it was neutrality. While nations bled themselves dry, choosing sides, the Rothschilds stood above the fray, lending to both victors and vanquished. They understood what few others did: wars end, but interest compounds. By the mid-19th century, kings called them the bankers to kings. Empires rose and fell on their credit. They were not conquerors, yet they shaped conquests. They were not rulers, yet they dictated the cost of power itself. And in the silence that followed Europe's endless wars, one truth echoed louder than any cannon: those who controlled the gold controlled the future. Gilded halls, velvet-draped chambers, the echo of footsteps where kings once ruled by decree, now joined by the quiet shuffle of bankers with ledgers. By the mid-19th century, Europe was changing. Crowns still glittered, but their power was eroding. Armies no longer guaranteed control. Credit did. And at the heart of that transformation stood the Rothschild family. They had begun as financiers to monarchs, the silent partners of empires. But by now they were something more profound, the architects of a new financial order. Through bond markets and state loans, the Rothschilds connected the ambitions of governments with the savings of their citizens. They became the bridge between nations and the invisible marketplace of money. Their London house, led by Nathan's heirs, became the pulse of European finance, issuing British government bonds, underwriting railways, funding canals, and advising on trade. In Paris, James de Rothschild's bank modernized the French economy, financing national infrastructure and industrial expansion. In Vienna and Frankfurt, the family managed imperial debts, negotiated treaties of finance, and stabilized currencies that kept empires alive. Before the rise of public central banks, there was the Rothschild network, a private system of liquidity and confidence that kept Europe's credit markets moving. They didn't just lend, they set the terms. Through their innovations, modern finance took shape. They standardized government bond issuance, creating markets where nations could borrow directly from investors. They pioneered the art of spreading risk across borders, ensuring that no single war or revolution could destroy their capital. They even developed protocols, due diligence, balance sheets, creditworthiness, that became the foundation of international banking. As monarchies fell and republics emerged, the Rothschilds adapted. They learned to speak the language of ministers and parliaments as easily as they once negotiated with kings. What had begun as dynastic wealth was evolving into institutional power. By the late 19th century, their methods had inspired the creation of national banks and centralized credit systems, precursors to modern central banking. Their influence wasn't written into constitutions, but it was felt in every interest rate, every bond auction, every loan that built a nation's future. Power was no longer crowned, it was calculated. And while politicians debated in public, the Rothschilds operated in quiet rooms, turning fiscal chaos into order, speculation into structure. In this new world, the throne was no longer the symbol of ultimate authority, it was the balance sheet. And those who mastered it, like the Rothschilds, shaped not just the destiny of empires, but the very rules by which modern economies would forever operate. They once moved the gold of nations and shaped the destinies of kings, but by the dawn of the 20th century, the Rothschild name had begun to drift, from history into legend. For over a century, they had stood at the center of Europe's financial machinery. Yet history has a way of rewriting power. New forces emerged, central banks, Wall Street, and modern governments, taking control of the financial systems the Rothschilds once privately commanded. The First World War shattered the old order, empires collapsed, borders shifted. And in the chaos, the Rothschild network, once united across London, Paris, Vienna, and Frankfurt, fractured under political pressure and national divisions. Their capital survived, but their dominance faded. By the time the Second World War erupted, they were no longer the world's bankers, just one great family among many, overtaken by institutions they themselves had helped inspire. But while their power declined, their image grew monstrous. In the 1930s, Nazi propaganda weaponized their name, transforming a real banking dynasty into a symbol of imagined control. Posters, films, and speeches painted the Rothschilds as puppet masters, behind wars, revolutions, and markets, the perfect villains for a collapsing world searching for someone to blame. What began as admiration for their financial genius turned into centuries of anti-Semitic conspiracy, echoing through populist movements and fringe literature long after the wars ended. In truth, the family's 20th century story was one of retreat, not domination. They lost estates, branches, and even lives to Nazi expropriation. In Austria and France, their banks were seized. Members fled to Switzerland and Britain, and while their names still carried echoes of vast wealth, their control over world finance was gone, replaced by state-run systems, international banks, and public markets. Yet the myth refused to die, because myths thrive on mystery, and the Rothschilds had always guarded their privacy. Their coded letters, hidden archives, and discreet operations, once practical tools of business, became fuel for imaginations that mistook secrecy for conspiracy. Even today, their legacy sits uneasily between fact and fiction. They built the foundations of modern banking, global credit, communication networks, and financial trust, yet are remembered as the invisible rulers of an imaginary empire. The truth is quieter and far more human. They rose through discipline, survived through adaptation, and faded as the world industrialized beyond them. The age of dynasties ended, the age of systems began, and in that transformation, the Rothschilds became something no family can control, a legend that outgrew the people who inspired it. From candlelit ledgers in Frankfurt, as ghetto to glass towers overlooking the Thames and the Seine, the Rothschild story has entered a new century. No more royal couriers, no secret codes, just analysts, investors, and vineyards that whisper of a legacy centuries old. The name still carries weight, but not the kind born of control. Today, it stands for continuity, the rare endurance of a family that once ruled the invisible empire of finance and now shapes influence through business, culture, and philanthropy. In London and Paris, the descendants of Nathan and James run Rothschild & Co., one of Europe's most respected financial institutions. Its reach spans investment banking, wealth management, and mergers, advising corporations and governments, not commanding them. The firm's power now lies in expertise, not monopoly, credibility, not secrecy. Their focus reflects the times, sustainable finance, environmental innovation, and global partnerships that favor long-term growth over empire building. Across the Alps, in Switzerland, another branch thrives. The Edmund de Rothschild Group, founded by Baron Edmund in the mid-20th century. Rooted in Geneva's tradition of private banking, it blends heritage with modern strategy, wealth management, impact investing, and social entrepreneurship. Here, money isn't an instrument of domination, but a means of creation. Yet not all of their influence lies behind boardroom doors. In France's Bordeaux region, two estates, Chateau Lafite Rothschild and Chateau Mouton Rothschild, remain among the most celebrated vineyards on earth. Generations of Rothschilds have transformed winemaking into art, blending history and craft in every bottle. Their labels, painted by artists like Picasso and Warhol, mirror the family's evolution, from the arithmetic of finance to the aesthetics of culture. Beyond business, their name threads through museums, hospitals, and universities. The Rothschild Foundation supports education, the arts, and medical research across Europe and Israel. Their patronage, once discreet, has become a quiet tradition of giving, a reversal of the power that once defined them. For all their ventures, what remains most remarkable is not what they own, but how they've adapted. From serving monarchs to advising markets, from secrecy to transparency, the family has outlasted revolutions, wars, and myths by reinventing what it means to hold influence. In an age defined by data and public scrutiny, the Rothschilds no longer move unseen. They move steadily, through trust, reputation, and heritage. Once the world's bankers, now its stewards, the modern Rothschilds prove that legacy isn't about the gold you guard. It's about the mark you leave when the world finally learns your story. Type the name Rothschild into any corner of the internet, and the echoes begin. Centuries after their rise, their name still drifts through the shadows of global conversation, whispered in conspiracies, invoked as proof of secret empires, repeated by those searching for someone to blame. Why this family? Why does their story, part fact, part fiction, refuse to fade? The answer lies not in their vaults, but in our psychology. When the world feels too complex, people reach for simple explanations. When systems seem untouchable, they invent faces for invisible power. And the Rothschilds, wealthy, private, and Jewish, became the perfect myth, the eternal financiers behind every curtain. But history tells a different story. By the 20th century, their dominance had waned. Central banks replaced private dynasties. Wall Street, not Frankfurt, became the heartbeat of finance. And in the 21st century, the real masters of influence are not families, but systems. Algorithms, corporations, data empires, and digital networks that no single name controls. Yet the myth endures, shaped by old prejudices and new fears. From 19th century pamphlets to 21st century message boards, anti-Semitic tropes have recycled the same illusion, that one family holds the strings of the world. It's a dangerous fantasy, one that has outlived facts, fueled hatred, and blurred the line between history and paranoia. The truth is more human and more humbling. The Rothschilds were not gods of finance. They were disciplined, brilliant, and sometimes ruthless, yes, but also bound by the same limits that govern every dynasty. They rose with innovation, adapted through change, and ultimately yielded to institutions far larger than themselves. What remains today is a symbol, a name that stands for the age when money first crossed borders faster than armies, when communication became power, and when secrecy could shape history. But the myth that grew around them says less about who they were and more about who we are. Our discomfort with unseen systems, our hunger for control in a world run by numbers and code. Today's power doesn't live in family vaults or marble mansions. It flows through algorithms, corporate boards, and neural networks, invisible, vast, and impersonal. We no longer fear the banker in the top hat, we fear the system that predicts our every move. And so the Rothschild myth survives, not because it's true, but because it comforts. It gives a face to what feels faceless. It tells a story, when the truth is far too complex for a single name to hold. Perhaps that is their final legacy, to remind us that real power never stays still. It simply changes form, from gold to credit to data, and always, always remains just beyond our sight.